So I'm delighted to introduce Professor Ward to you all with the tantalising topic from the marriage bar to the Hypatia Scholarship. Thank you.
Escaper. Oh, controller. Yeah.
Put it in full screen.
Thank you very much, David, for that kind introduction. And thank you to the Rotary Club for your very warm welcome and inviting me to share with you some remarks in the next few minutes. I'm really pleased to be here and to have this opportunity. I'm going to explain what the Hypatia Scholarship is, and I'm hoping that some of you may remember that there was such a thing in Australia as the marriage bar. Is that better? Okay. Can you hear me well? Okay, thank you. So we'll come on to those in a moment. Just to start with situating this in terms of the Australian universities and the participation of women in them as academic staff. So these are the earliest universities that were founded in Australia, starting with University of Sydney in 1852, then Melbourne, then Adelaide, and then they're a little out of order, but there are others. And you can see that it took almost 100 years or 50 years or quite a long time before the first woman was employed in any capacity at these universities. But women have been in Australian mathematics in universities for over 100 years now. And these women were employed mostly initially as tutors and as perhaps very junior lecturers. And then slowly, as time has passed, there's been some progression. And now there are more of us employed in more senior roles. But it has taken quite a long time. Now, as David mentioned, some of the things that I've had the opportunity to do and be in my career, and that has been wonderful. I've had a tremendous career in mathematics that has given me a great deal of satisfaction. I love the teaching, I love the research, I love working with students, I love discovering new facts that nobody has known before. And I've been very, very fortunate to be able to pursue this career. First of all, just in civil society, I have a whole range of civil rights. My name is on the title of my house and my car. I can own property. I earn the same salary as a man would at my level of seniority, not just in my sector, higher education, but also in comparable sectors. I can vote. I can stand as a candidate for election, as we are very proud to remember that this is South Australia that led the way in the world in that regard. When I became an employee at my university, I wasn't required to affirm any particular religious beliefs in order to become an employee. When I got married, I didn't lose my permanent job. I was able to keep continuing to superannuation, and I didn't have my employer's previous contributions to superannuation forfeited. In my profession, I was able to pursue my maths and science interests and develop my skills through formal education. I could do an undergraduate degree in Australia, I could go to the US to do a PhD, and I could also be awarded those degrees. So I have degree certificates with my name on them. All of those things, everything I've mentioned, is very recent. In civil society, South Australia was also first in Australia in 1884 with the Married Women's Property Act. Before that, my name would not have been on the title of my house, etc. And there are a whole range of other things. The Australian marriage bar was not abolished until November 1966. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The equal pay decision was not until 1969, and that was for men and women doing the same job. Later, 3 years later, for men and women doing comparable work in different sectors. So that's what you need to overcome the pay gap due to sex segregation, gender segregation in the workforce. And the Sex Discrimination Act was not passed until 1976. Thank you, Susan Ryan. In universities specifically, the first universities were established about 1,000 years ago. The very first one was in Fez in Morocco, then Bologna in Italy, and then Oxford around the year 1096, and a number of others soon after. So we've had 1,000 years of universities. For the vast majority of that time, women were not allowed to study as students. And even once they were allowed to study as students, they were normally not allowed to be awarded degrees. So the history of women in maths is littered with very accomplished women like Sonia Kovalevsky, who studied at a German university, but her degree is from Trinity College Dublin, because that was one of the few universities that would award degrees to women, and they would do so even if the undergraduate work had been done at another university that they recognised. Oxford first awarded degrees to women in the year 1920. Australian universities were open to women as students from the start, but there were not so many women as students. The student bodies were overwhelmingly male. And as you can see, it took some time for women to get onto the faculty. Of course, to become an academic staff member, you need the academic qualifications. And so, for one thing, if you can't get the academic qualifications, that automatically strikes you out from becoming an academic staff member. By the time of my education in the 1980s and 1990s, at my undergraduate university, which was not in Adelaide, I never had a female lecturer in maths or physics or chemistry. There were no women academic staff in the maths department still, and hardly any in the science faculty. When I went to the US to study, there were no women lecturers in my courses, and there were no women members of staff who had permanency. And I went to an elite US university that was founded in about 1700. It was less than 100 years before that they had started to admit women to the graduate program, to the PhD programs, and it was less than 20 years since they had admitted them as undergraduates. I started in 1987, and 1969 was the year that women could first attend that university. So you can imagine the knock-on effects. If women couldn't train at these tremendous universities, so many opportunities were closed to them later. And that's what drives me in this work. So alongside all my teaching and so on, I've done a lot of equity work, and it's because I just think it's not fair. It's not fair that people, for irrelevant reasons, should be excluded from these opportunities to grow as humans, to develop the talents and the interests that they have, and to contribute to society. So that's my motivation. People often say, yes, I've got daughters and I would like them to have the opportunities that my sons will have, or whatever. There's lots of motivations. But anyway, it's been very important to me. So, all right, there's the passionate part. Let's move on a little bit. So with those sorts of motivations in mind, in the early 2000s and 2010s, a few of us women mathematicians from around Australia started getting together and trying to build community. We had no national organisation at that time, but there were a lot of isolated champions of equity, and not just for gender, also for other underrepresented groups, which for time reasons I won't talk about much today. But anyway, there's a few of us. I'm the fourth from the right, and the right-hand woman closest to me here is Cheryl Praeger, and she and I have co-written this 40-page article recently about the history of women in maths in Australia, which is why I think I'm here to talk about that sort of thing. And at the bottom, you can see the logo of the Women in Mathematics group that we now have in Australia, as David mentioned, and we set it up as part of our professional organisation, the Australian Mathematical Society, which has been a good strategic decision as it happened. So here's the problem. This is the only graph I'm showing today. I know not everybody likes graphs, but this one is really important. It's the graph of women's participation in mathematical sciences, statistics, including stats, mathematics, applied maths, pure maths, and so on, in Australia. And the women are the red line. So the vertical axis goes from 0% up to 100%. And the start of the red line on the left is, I think it's about 40% bachelor completions in mathematics. So that's saying that 40% of the undergraduate degrees in maths that are completed are in 2014, when this data is, were completed by women. That's a lot more than when I was at university, and it's a gain to be really proud of, that things have changed to that extent. And then above bachelor, there's honours, PhD completion, and then there's casual teaching, and then there's the 5 academic ranks from the lowest, which is level, what we call level A, level B, and so on up to level E, which is what I am now as a professor. And, you know, guess what? That number is, those percentages are decreasing all the way across. The single employment rank where you have the most women is the casual teaching, etc. And by the time you get up, which casual teaching is at about 30%, and then the lower academic ranks are around 30%, a little bit less. And by the time you get to my level, it's about 9% women. So there are not that many. So why? There's a lot of reasons why. It's a complex, multifaceted problem. Another part of it is maths has changed quite slowly compared to other disciplines. Law and medicine are now way over 50% women at the undergraduate level, but also more or less at the academic staff level and participation in industry and so on. So there are differences between disciplines. There's a lot of subtle questions here. But just to set the historical scene, in Australia, in addition to what I said before, you know, we used to have the female wage and the male wage. It was a completely different mindset. There was this presumption that men were breadwinners. This was the minimum wage decision of 1912 by Mr. Justice somebody, and he determined what the minimum wage should be for a labourer, with the assumption that the labourer is married and has 3 children. And then women, he also determined the minimum wage for women, and obviously they weren't going to be responsible for supporting themselves or dependents, so their wage was set at 54% of the male minimum wage. And that lasted on and off. In the war, it changed a little bit because they needed the female work, but it lasted on and off until the equal pay decisions that I mentioned before. So that was part of the context, and people thought that was normal, right? The marriage bar. Who has ever heard of the marriage bar here? Yep, a few. You may have had some personal experience with it. If not you, then people you know, and so on. But the marriage bar was a federal law based on a British law, which in the end was abolished 20 years previously, which just said that if you worked for the Commonwealth Public Service, if you were a Commonwealth teacher in a Commonwealth state school, and if you worked in organisations of the public service like CSIRO or Defence Science and Technology or the Bureau of Meteorology, and you were a woman and you were married, you could not hold a permanent job. So if you had a permanent job there and you got married, then you forfeited your permanency. You could continue often as a temporary person, but you lost your super, you lost the contributions that the company had made to your super and so forth. And again, people thought this was normal. Okay, that was the marriage bar. And it didn't technically apply to universities. However, there's been some research done by a political scientist who I asked her exactly this question, well, how did that play out in the universities? And she said, okay, the marriage bar didn't apply, but this is from some of her published work. Senior women at a particular university commented that when they started out, the choice for women was marriage or career, and they had chosen career. And that was the way that people thought about it. And furthermore, she said, at the time, university careers were generally 2-person careers, with wives providing family and domestic support, as well as unpaid research assistance. And women generally lacked such forms of domestic support. So I don't know about you, but I need a wife. I need a wife to provide that unpaid research assistance. That'd be great. That would be awesome. I could be cloned. I could do twice as much research. Anyway, right. There's a lot of other factors besides these historical ones. There are societal factors. There are psychological factors. There's things like the imposter phenomenon. There's explicit bias. There's implicit bias. And these days we have a much better evidence base from the peer-reviewed public literature about these sorts of things. And I'll just mention one thing, the Jennifer and John study, which is one particular study that demonstrates, well, you might think maybe men have a bit of an advantage in, for instance, the employment market. Is it true that you might have slightly better chances of employment and better conditions of employment if you were a man than if you were a woman with the same qualifications? Well, how would you test that? So here's how they tested it in the US. They made up a fictional resume, and they made 250 copies, and half of them had the name Jennifer so-and-so at the top, and the other half had the name John so-and-so, and otherwise identical. And they had a study cohort who did not know what the study was about. The study cohort were senior academics who were trying to hire a lab technician, and they didn't know that this was a fictional CV, but they received randomized either the male name CV or the female name CV. And then they were asked a few questions about, would you hire this person? How much mentoring would you give them? What starting salary would you offer? That was a job where the employer had discretion on the starting salary. And guess what? One gender indeed did have a statistically, it was like one standard deviation, for those who know what that means, more higher chance of being employed on the same CV. And they were all going to get a comparable amount more mentoring. And what was the starting salary bonus? Just think of a number in your head, don't say it out loud. How much bonus would you get for being called John? The answer was 14%. 1-4. Great study. Very illuminating. There's a similar study in Australia about a correspondence study about the same CV, but with fictional family names that look as if they're from different ethnic backgrounds, which also had an even more dramatic difference. But that's another story. Okay, so we really wanted to see what we could do about these sorts of things. So we set up the Women in Mathematics group of the Australian Mathematical Society. And this is an old snapshot of our website. And we do many, many different activities through that group. And I believe we've made quite a significant difference at the national level with mutual support and with very concrete things. So I'll just mention a few of the initiatives. And also I'll mention a local initiative here in Adelaide too. This is a few more people, through a few more of the women mathematicians who've contributed to setting up this group and to running the different parts of this small professional society within a professional society. So one of the first things we did is start to build community. So every 6 months we have gatherings in each city. So here in Adelaide we get together. Last time it was at Flinders with the women in maths and stats from Adelaide and UniSA and Flinders. We get together and we talk about some sort of concrete thing. Someone might give a little research talk or something like that, but we just get to know each other. And you're so busy doing all your daily stuff. Building those connections is really fruitful for future potential actions. Also at our national conferences, we usually have a lunch where the women and anybody who wants to come are invited and get together, and often the female plenary speakers will give a bit of a talk about their own pathways and tips and so on. So those have been very productive. And we also set up a travel grant scheme, as David mentioned, and I'm very pleased to say that now, after the first 10 years, we've made 84 travel grants for women to go to conferences, or to go and visit someone and work with someone, or to bring someone to work with them if that's more convenient. And there have been a large number of publications that have come out of these collaborations. So this has had a real impact. It's very strategic because in my work world, research publications are the currency of advancement. And if you don't have time and opportunity to generate them, then you're going to have less chance to advance and get a better job and so forth. We also have a parallel award, which is open to people at every gender, and which is for caring responsibilities. So if you're going to a conference and taking your kid and you need some childcare at the conference, you can use this grant for that. Or if you're a conference organizer, you can use this grant to provide childcare to everyone at your conference. So I'm very proud of the travel grants schemes. Oh, that's just the poster for the travel grant schemes, along with some others of our professional society. And then the local initiative I wanted to mention is something at UniSA that has been running since 1998, set up by an old colleague of ours, David. And this is a scheme that offers a small scholarship stipend, to undergraduate women in mathematics who've done well in maths at school and want to pursue mathematics or statistics at university. And so it's not a large amount of money. It's $5,000 per year for 1 year. So it's only $5,000 per student. They do get a shared office on the campus, which they share with other Hypatia students. So again, that's building community. And we see that those friendships become very strong and they study together and they help support each other through the degree. So it works on a number of levels. And they also have some summer internship opportunities. We find them internship opportunities during the summer. And it's a simple application process. So this has been quite impactful as well. We've had 40 scholars or more than that now. I'm just going to say we are between sponsors for the Hypatia Scholarship. So if you know of anyone who might be interested in contributing to something that I think is really high impact and really a way that has a big effect in addressing this issue, then please talk to me or David, or let us know. Okay. Then the other thing David mentioned that we did run here after we'd had this Women in Maths group for a few years, we built enough reputation and credibility that I woke up in the middle of the night one night and I thought, we should run a conference. And 2 years later, we managed to deliver this conference here in Adelaide at UniSA's City West campus, just over there. And it was tremendous. And I had been to a couple of majority women conferences overseas, and I knew how empowering it was, but it had never been done in Australia. So most women in Australia, I've worked, I think it's about 30,000 days in my career now. Fewer than 10 of them, I've been in a majority women environment. There is no maths department in the world I know of that has majority women staff. We're always in the minority. And it was just so powerful to be in a room where it's like, oh, I'm in the big group. We're normal. Anyway, we ran this wonderful conference here with about 200 people present of all genders. There were 100 talks, all given by women across 12 different research areas. We had lots of extra add-ons, and it was great. And I'm very pleased to say that the third in this series of conferences has just been delivered, and will be delivered in October this year. So this has become a regular event, and people speak about it in very positive ways. So yeah, it's had a lot of impact. It's led to a lot of local women in maths organisations being set up, and lots of publications again. That was our poster for the conference. And what I wanted to close with is progressing to the level of full professor is not everything. That is absolutely not everything in an academic career. It doesn't measure your worth. But it's too hard to gather the data for how many women there are at every single level. But my colleague and I have spent hundreds of hours gathering the data. So what you see here is at the level of full professor, my level of employment, these 91 names are all the women who in history ever in Australia's 40 universities have ever been at level E, the full professor level, in mathematical sciences. And that's not just applied math, it's not just pure math, it's also pure statistics, and it's also maths education, where there are quite a lot of women. So if you go down to just pure and applied maths, it would be 40 of us in history. I still don't know whether to think that's a big number or that's a small number. It's a bigger number than I feared the true number might be. So, and I can see that there are more women being promoted every year, and it's becoming a more hospitable career. And they are good careers. This is another reason we don't want our girls to be shot out of these careers, because they're good careers. They're economically sound. You get a good salary. You have good working conditions, and all of that. So, anyway, this is one imperfect measure of where we're at now. My colleague Cheryl was the second woman ever to reach this level in Australia, and she was appointed in 1983. With that, I will just pass to the Hypatia Scholarship, just to remind you, in case you have any bright ideas of someone I could talk to. And thank you very, very much for your attention. Thank you.